Earlier I said I think I'm seeing your wife today. And he went, what? I went, never mind.
I'm like, I'm seeing your wife tonight. Maybe I'm not.
Is that what you There's so many stories of faithful women. I always thought it was just like really need to get my whole life has been a lot.
Hi everyone, welcome. We're just going to get started in a few minutes, so if you're coming in the door now, please find your seat and sit tight.
What a wild
Good. Yeah.
So it's going to be part of your same attitude. We'll make your
Should have done some flashcards beforehand.
I don't know. It sounds like that if you were deciding to cancel your car next week, is what that sounds like. You could live for more because nobody wants to live.
Well,
Yeah, totally.
That's very brave. That sets you up for a lot of I mean, like comedy?
Great for free, so now.
What you were saying?
Hi everyone, welcome, good evening, hi, thanks for being here. Good evening and welcome to Greenlight Bookstore on Flatbush Ave. I'm Jean, events coordinator here at Greenlight, and we're very excited to host tonight's event with Phuc Tran presenting the paperback of his acclaimed memoir, Saigon. We'll be talking with Alisson Wood, who's another Flatiron Books author, so you're in for a very special evening. She'll also be reading from her book, Being Lolita. And before I turn things over to them, just a couple of housekeeping reminders. We do ask that everyone keep their masks on for the entirety of their time at the store. And please turn off or silence your cell phones, For those of you joining via the live stream tonight, welcome. Please feel free to comment in the chat and ask any questions of the author using the Q&A option on the Zoom window. Greenlight staff may read some of those questions aloud as part of our audience Q&A later in the evening. We are recording this event on Zoom, so if it turns out well, we'll share it on our YouTube channel and other social media platforms later on. And most importantly, don't forget to buy the book if you haven't already. If you purchased a book bundle with your ticket, thank you so much. And if you're here in person, hopefully you collected your copy at the door. We also have extra signed copies for sale at the register tonight, freshly signed by Phuc and Alisson. Your purchase of Saigon or Being Lolita makes it possible for us to continue to offer accessible event programming like this, so we're really thankful for your purchase and for your attendance. Our interviewer for this evening is Alisson Wood. Wood's award-winning writing has been published in the New York Times, the Paris Review, the Rumbus, Vogue, and Vanity Fair. Alisson holds an MFA in fiction from New York University and teaches creative writing at her alma mater. She is the founder and editor-in-chief of Pigeon Pages, an NYC literary journal and reading series. Being Lolita is her first book and a breathtakingly powerful memoir about a young woman who must learn to rewrite her own story. Alisson will be speaking with our featured author tonight, Phuc Tran. Tran has been a high school Latin teacher for more than 20 years, while also simultaneously establishing himself as a highly sought-after tattooer in the Northeast. Renaissance man. Tran graduated Bard College in 1995 with a BA in Classics and received the Callanan Classics Prize. He taught Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit in New York at the Collegiate School and was an instructor at Brooklyn College's Summer Latin Institute. Most recently, he taught Latin, Greek, and German at the Waynflete School in Portland, Maine. His 2012 TEDx talk, Grammar, Identity, and the Dark Side of the Subjunctive, was featured on NPR's TED Radio Hour. He tattoos and lives with his family in Portland, Maine. Our featured book tonight is the new paperback edition of Tran's award-winning memoir, Saigon. For anyone who has ever felt like they don't belong, Saigon shares an irreverent, funny, and moving tale of displacement and assimilation, woven together with poignant themes from beloved works of classic literature. Bookpage praised it as the best, the funniest, and the most heartfelt memoir of the year. a lot of memoirs. So you're in for a great evening. Alisson will be reading from Being Lolita, and Phuc will be reading from Saigon, and then Alisson and Phuc will be in conversation, and then you'll have the chance to ask questions and talk with Alisson and Phuc, and there'll be an opportunity to get your books personalized after the event if you wish. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Phuc and Alisson.
Is this where I just get up and read?
Yeah, right there, wherever you like.
I'll drag this around. Do you mind passing this?
Do you want to just use mine?
Oh yeah, sure.
Right.
All right.
Love it.
Hello. All right. Jean warned us that we would have karaoke microphones. So if Fleetwood Mac comes on, look out. This reading is going to take a sharp left. Alrighty. So I'll just read a little bit from my book. And what do I need to say about this scene? I'm going to read like two really short passages. This one just happens in a grocery store. So there's a guy, and there are my parents, there's me, and my brother Lou. So yeah. August 1983. Where are you people from? We were shopping at Giant, the grocery store, pushing our carts slowly. Lou and I took turns dangling from the cart, making impassioned pleas to our parents to buy Count Chocula. An older gentleman stepped into our path, intercepting us with his question, the question that, as I grew up in Carlisle, I would sustain regularly. A query angled with varying degrees of inflection, from curious to neutral to cutting. Where are you people from? Even at 9 years old, I heard the nuances of you people. I caught his drift. His drift was sharp and edgy. It was pointed. His drift didn't sound like a friendly game of catch. My parents hadn't heard him because they were Vietnamesing with each other about their shopping lists, and they weren't expecting anyone to speak to them. No one knew us in that informal, neighborly way, and my parents weren't part of the small-town colloquium that burbled and babbled around us. I saw other people, friends and neighbors, stopping and talking to one another. How's Little League? Donna doing okay? Did you see the game last night? We weren't in Little League. No one asked about my mother's health. We didn't watch sports on TV. The man spoke up louder, with the kind of volume that inferred lack of Englishing. Where are you people from? I nudged my father, who broke off from his conversation with my mother, to acknowledge the man. Yes, sir? Always publicly polite. Where are you people from? The man had yellow-tinted aviators and a gray mustache reminding me of Magnum P.I. from TV. His belly overhung a large buckle, pressing taut against his plaid shirt. Maybe he was a private eye. Maybe he was working a case. Or was grocery store security. Oh, we're from Vietnam. My father smiled widely, nervously. His default was always to smile in awkward or strange situations, but I felt his posture tense up. My father also caught the man's drift, and he moved protectively in between the man and us. Yeah, thought so. Thought I recognized it. Vietnamese. I haven't heard it since I was in country. Thought to myself, sounds like Vietnamese. My brother Lou started to correct the man's pronunciation of Vietnamese, but I kicked him from behind the cart. Lou caught my drift as well, and he shut up. In the Marines there, stationed in Da Nang, 68 to 69. He looked at us all as he spoke, eyes slinking from my father's rigid smile to my mother, to us kids. Oh yes, Da Nang. It's in the middle of Vietnam. We're from Saigon. My father continued to smile as we stood still, nervous prey whiffing a predatory scent. My eyes scanned the American flag pin and other buttons on his jacket lapel. The gentleman looked at us, but his eyes were distant, their focus going far beyond where we were, right through us. I looked behind myself at the produce section, understanding that he wasn't looking at the broccoli or cabbage. Beautiful country there, Nam. He said Nam with a southern lilt. Nam. Carlisle, surprising to most outsiders, has a slight southern drawl to its local dialect. Beautiful country, Nam. Goddamn shame what happened there. My father nodded. goddamn shame, the man murmured. We all nodded and stood there for a time, staring at Mr. Magnum PI as he stared at the broccoli behind us. We, as a family in turn, looked blankly around. My father gazed farther down the aisle, Lou and I fidgeting wordlessly at the cart, everyone bobbling their heads. The man hadn't asked us a further question, so we had no answer to give. Well, you people have a good day. Thank you, you too, sir. My father and mother smiled and waved. Lou had used the distraction to sneak a box of Count Chocula into the cart. Why did that man ask us where we were from? My parents had already wandered farther down the aisle, sorting through the different cooking oils on the shelves. I was pushing the cart, so I answered my brother. Oh, because that man fought in the Vietnam War. The metal grocery cart resumed its screechy circuit in between the aisles. So? Well, we're from Vietnam. I said Vietnam the way the man had said it. Well, not me. I was born here in Carlisle. My brother Lou had a point. Well, that is true, but people are always going to ask you where you're from. But I'm from Pennsylvania. Spoken like the future lawyer he would be. That's true. You were born here, but it won't make sense to people. They'll still ask you where you're from. They mean like mom and dad and me, your family, where we're from. How did that man know that we weren't from here? It's complicated. I chose not to explain bigotry to Lou, though he probably already knew it. He had experienced being the only one in his classes too, but at least the other one at school was his brother. I was blindly hoping that he wasn't aware of the prejudice, but who was I kidding? Whose innocence was I trying to preserve? And why did that man say that it was a shame what happened? Lou persisted. I don't know. He didn't really say, did he? I was pained to tell Lou to get used to being asked where he was from, but he had to. And eventually he would, whether I wanted him to or not. Get used to it, or get crushed by it. We all learned quickly to smile and nod whenever veterans would see us and tell us that they were in Nam. They named their branch of service, told us what years they were there, where they were stationed, and how they found the people or the weather. Later, when I was older and a little savvier, I would round out my exchange by saying something like, "Thanks for your service," or "My grandparents worked for the US Embassy," volunteering something to identify myself as one of the good ones. But that was much later, when I realized that this wasn't about me or my family. It was about them and what we symbolized for them. How could I explain to my brother that we were symbols? That some people would never be able to see us as just people? That we were symbols of a painful and confusing war? Symbols of the refugees they saw on TV? Symbols of whatever they were afraid of? Symbols of the people who had shot at them and killed their friends, brothers, and sons? Symbols of whatever. That was what we were for Mr. Magnum PI. In the middle of the giant grocery store, we had to pause our shopping and be symbols for what he saw in the fuzzy, distant gaze of recollection and trauma. The trans didn't choose to be symbolic or archetypal, but it wasn't our choice to make. So I'll pause there. I'm just going to read one more thing, and then I'm going to pass it off to Allison. So every chapter of my book is told through the lens of great works of literature from the Western canon, so like mostly dead white guys. But there's a twist. So this is just the opening for the Metamorphosis. It's very super short. So Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis is a simple story. Gregor Samsa awakes to find himself transformed into a giant bug. When he discovers that he's a giant bug, he immediately looks at the clock and thinks about which train he can still catch to get to work on time. By himself, he's not freaking out about being a giant roach at all. His parents and sister, whom he's been supporting, freak out. His supervisor from work shows up and freaks out. Gregor has turned into a giant bug, but he does not freak out about his transformation until he has to navigate his relationships with his family and his work supervisor. You read The Metamorphosis and you realize it's his family's ugliness towards Gregor that moves the story. Gregor is now a giant roach, and he cannot do anything about it. His family, instead of acting with compassion and kindness, sends Gregor to his room and locks the door. What's worse than turning into a giant bug? turning into a giant bug and having your family act like a bunch of assholes. Isn't that adolescence? A biological change over which we have no control. And then our family, like a bunch of assholes, treats us like an insect in the midst of a metamorphosis that we ourselves hardly understand. Suddenly, with a different focus, from the perspective of a bug, we can see who they really are. So, pause there. Allison's going to read as well.
Okay, first off, aren't we all like so excited about this? And how great it is that we get to have an in-person event for the paperback launch.
Yeah,
It's
your
amazing.
first. No,
My
it's-
first,
yeah.
yes. And at such a wonderful bookstore as Greenlight. We are all so lucky. Big
Yeah.
hand for Greenlight. And everyone on Zoom, Chromecast, hello. Hello, happy to have you here too. So I am just going to read the opening of the book. You don't need to know anything. So, exciting. Being Lolita. The first time he kissed me, it wasn't on the mouth. I hadn't read the book yet. He told me it was a beautiful story about love. We would meet in the next town over, a diner off the highway, open all night. I would know what time to meet him in our booth in the back corner because, in the middle of his class, in front of everyone, he would look at me, look into my eyes, and write a number on the blackboard, 8 or 9 or 10, and then wipe it away with his other hand. He was an English teacher in my high school. His shirt sleeves were always chalk-kissed with white. He was 26. The first time he saw me, I was 17. I would tell my parents I was going to a friend's house or studying somewhere, but really, I would be sitting across from him for hours, the pastel painting depicting Greek ruins on the wall above him, while he would grade students' essays and I would sometimes do my Latin conjugations. Mostly, I would write to him, in front of him, and he would bring it home or sometimes read it there under the 24-hour fluorescence and then write back, all over napkins, the paper placemats, scraps from school. We probably covered hundreds of pieces with cursive, but I have only the handful that I hid from him, kept close and stolen away. Before we would leave, he'd take the papers and napkins and rip them up, put them into our water glasses, and I would watch them lose their shape and the ink bleed. I wasn't allowed to keep things. I wasn't supposed to call him Mr. when we were alone, only his first name. But I could never call him that in school. No phone calls, no emails, no touching. He made the rules. The rules were broken at that diner in our booth. It was May. Summer was almost there, and graduation hung in every classroom, crepe paper and glue glitter banners filling the halls, a countdown everywhere. You couldn't escape it. He was trying to teach me about great literature, to prepare me for what I would face as a freshman in college just a few months in the future. You should definitely be an English major, he told me, leaning back into the booth, his arms stretched out on top of the bench, taking up so much space across from me. It was supposed that, if we were on a date, unseen in a dark theater, would be the transition movement before he put his arm around me. He wouldn't bother with a fake cough, he'd just go for it, I was sure. He would read me the greats at our table of beige formica and dull silver. Poe, Dickens, Hawthorne, Carroll. He'd get into it, doing voices when he read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, laughing at literary jokes that I was surely supposed to understand, so I laughed too. I lapped it up, knowing how lucky I was to have this kind of private instruction. That night he was reading Lolita to me, from the beginning of things. He spoke to me in Nabokov's opening lines, languidly. Light of my life, fire of my loins. I thought it was the most romantic thing ever, but I was ruining it. I had a bug bite, and I kept pushing my ankles together, trying to quell the tinge of itch, a child who couldn't sit still. He began rubbing the edges of the pages with his thumb, harder and harder as his voice grew louder, creating tiny rips in the paper as he stroked them. Finally, he asked, "A mosquito bite?" "Yes," I said, an invisible ruler against my spine. "Don't you have any calamine lotion?" "Not on me," I said. "You know," he said, "saliva can stop the itch." He looked at me. He had green eyes. My flip-flopped feet were on the cracked red leather next to him on the booth, my legs under the table, bridging the gap between our benches. Not touching, just beside him. I followed the rules. He leaned down to my foot next to him and put his lips on my pink, swollen ankle. I felt his breath on my skin. And it was like every locker in the halls of my high school swung open at once, metal kissing cinder block walls. It felt just like that. Thanks. Okay, so my first question for you.
Oh boy, okay.
What is your go-to karaoke song?
Oh,
You opened the door for this.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
opened the door.
I mean, I do a pretty good Depeche Mode, I would have to say.
Woo!
Right?
Nice.
Sue?
Nice.
Yeah, like,
Nice.
yeah, like if I'm, yeah, for sure. But if I feel like I want to like push myself, then maybe like, I don't know, Elton John or something, maybe.
Are you
But
a Rocket Man guy?
Yeah, but not Tiny Dancer, but yeah, Rocket Man.
Rocket
Yeah,
Man.
yeah. I like to give it a go, yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
aim for the stars.
Yeah, of course,
Okay.
of course.
We're literally just going to talk about karaoke now.
No. Well,
Wait, what's yours? Do you karaoke?
I do, or I did in the before times.
Yeah.
My go-to song was Closer by 9 Inch Nails.
Wow. Yeah.
If anyone here ever went to Tin House when I was there, you saw it happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did it happen on the internet? Can we find it on YouTube?
It's not on the internet.
All right.
No.
I doubt.
No, unfortunately. Thankfully. But so the reason I wanted to start with such a fun question, well, first off is because as someone else who has written a memoir that very much is about difficult topics. It's about trauma, it's about being an adolescent and trying to get through that. Something that I found really important when I was sort of in the publishing, like in the publicity process, is, something that every now and then someone would say to me was like, actually your book is kind of fun at times. Like actually there's like parts that are interesting, or, of course the entire book is interesting, obviously. Clearly.
Yeah.
But parts that were, sort of like connective in like a pop culture way. And that was something that absolutely came through with me loud and clear in here over and over again. I just thought that it was so fun how you were bringing up My Bloody Valentine, Metallica, X-Men.
Sure.
I worked at a comic book store when I was in high school.
God, that's a dream job.
Oh yeah.
I just worked at the library.
Okay, here's the thing though, I think it was like middle school when we did like the career day or whatever,
Yeah.
I wanted to be a librarian.
Oh.
So like we were both living each other's dream.
Yeah, clearly.
So, yeah. My first question really is, like, what was the integration of pop culture into your book? Like, for me, it felt incredibly organic and, like it just made sense, But was that a conscious thing? Did it just sort of happen when you were writing? Was it, like, in the editing process, like, to give color,
Yeah, like paprika. Like, I need more reference to
little spice
music.
to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, I think at least for me and my brother and my family, I think we weren't able, there was no differentiation in the Americanization process of what was high and low brow culture. There wasn't you need to know about Shakespeare and Melville, but you don't need to know about 9 Inch Nails, or Benny Hill or whatever.
Everyone needs to know about 9 Inch Nails.
Yeah, for sure. Well, no, and we didn't make the distinction. We were just well, this is America, whatever's on TV, and frankly, the literacy piece from my family, none of the adults in my family really read or could read, and so that really came for me a lot later. But I think my parents, when we came to the country, they sort of really believed that if you just filled out some paperwork, well, you were an American now, congrats. They didn't realize that there was all this sort of cultural fine print, there was an asterisk there. And so like, I think like the push to Americanize, which was like very strong in the 70s and 80s, right? There wasn't this like celebrate diversity. It was just sort of like learn English or die, you know? And so, and part of that was just like learning about the pop culture. Like, so it was like, and also like just on the playground, you know, like this is this is a funny tangent. Like we had this like old hand-me-down secondhand TV, and we didn't get NBC. You know, so like in the 70s and 80s there were like 3 channels, 4 if you counted public television. But like I was missing 25% of all TV shows because I didn't get like NBC. So kids would come to school and they'd be like, oh, like blah 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 Cosby Show, or like I can't even name them. I don't even know what the shows were on NBC. Like Silver Spoons? No.
Cheers. You didn't know Cheers.
I didn't know what Cheers. I've never seen an episode of Cheers.
Wow.
Yeah, and
That's
like
a loss. I'm so sorry.
well, it's like super weird. Like you go to school and the kids are just like, oh, I saw the show. I thought I was like 18. Like I never saw 18 because it was on NBC. And they're just like, Mr. T's so awesome. I'm like, who's Mr. T? Like I thought he was like a friend of like the Kool-Aid man. Because like it was like ice.
I see that. I see that logic. I see that.
So it comes out in weird ways. So I think like I just recognized that just because I was missing a channel on television, it was like a weird gap. And yeah. So anyway, so it's very organic, I think. Yeah.
So like, did you find, okay, so obviously it's organic in the beginning of the process, but as we know, memoir is not just like telling the story of your life, it's also a very, crafted process. It's very conscious, it's very, it's a lot of work. So I know that, and this is sort of like an insider writing thing, it's very, very, very expensive to use lyrics from songs.
Yes.
So like there were moments in my original draft that I was like, well, I want to reference maybe not a Nine Inch Nails song, but maybe like Tori Amos or something, because we were in slightly different eras. You were more so in the 80s, I was in the late 90s, early 2000s in my high school. So I remember at one point I was like, I'm going to use lyrics. And then womp womp, because they're like thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if at any point
no, that totally happened. Yeah, no, I had song lyrics all over the place, and they're like.
I mean, a Misfits memoir of great books, punk rock, and the fight to fit in. I was like, wow, did they have a huge budget? Is there like Bloody Valentine all over here?
I like snuck in like little Easter eggs, like allusions to lyrics without them being blatant, like sort of like pay to play kind of things. Yeah.
Right.
So or licensing, there wasn't any. I just like snuck it into the text, and like I felt like if people like they're like nods to like Smith's lyrics. So like if you know the Smiths, like you'd be like, oh, like he totally stole that from the thing.
Right.
But I was like, I didn't pay for the licensing.
Well, your editor is here, but we're gonna.
It's too late.
Okay, was there one that you like? You wish. Like, was there one that hurt that you had to take it out?
No, because I just found another way to put it in.
Right. Crafting.
Yeah.
The crafting of memoir. The crafting.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I want to know, did you, for you, was the pop culture piece also just sort of baked into the writing for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that when you're writing about being a teenager, which we both were, and being a kid, I mean, pop culture is just so much a part of who you are and how you identify. I was into Fiona Apple and Tori Amos and also Nine Inch Nails. Like, that was my identity in high school. I also had a Third Eye Blind poster up. But, it's like so much of your decor, like the band t-shirts, what you're talking about. Like, back then it was like CDs and records and they had like the lyrics everywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
You could like read the lyrics like opening up the CD, and so it was also like, oh, I have Silent All These Years memorized, do you?
Yeah.
And I feel like because you are, when you're a teenager, and I felt like this was your similar experience very much, like when you're young and an adolescent, you're still sort of defining yourself and trying to figure out who you are.
Yeah.
And using pop culture, books, music, TV, I feel like it's such a way to do that, right?
Yeah, it's like what you like determines like what you are like, right, in some ways.
Absolutely,
At least when you're
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and that's I think a very natural and earned part of growing up. There's this phase. I think also college can be very intense about music and art and
for sure.
all of that.
Yeah, it's I felt like it's like even maybe a little bit judgy or right.
I was gonna say it could be a little snobby, but I was gonna be nice here.
Yeah.
But yeah, people can be a little you
Yeah,
know?
for sure. Well, and I was just like, wait, that's lowbrow? I mean, I feel like that
Right.
distinction is like a strange one anyway.
Absolutely. It can be so, and it's also so connected to class.
Yeah, 1,000%.
It's absolutely connected to class.
Yeah.
And, you know, yeah, it's so complicated. So something else that I noticed, I hope it's okay, I'm going to be coming at this in a lot of ways of where we overlap,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I think that's
please.
just so interesting
Yeah.
and like a rich opportunity for us to talk about that, because you know I don't get to talk to other people who are that often who are like, so your book, you also use the the construct of high school.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and that's sort of maybe a craft question, process question as well, because you know something that I think a lot of students, people who want to write memoir, it's like, well, how can I like fit my entire life into a book? And it's like, well, you got to choose a container, right? Like
Sure.
a theme, a person, an idea. So like, what made you? Because obviously, I mean, like, you're so smart, and you have so much to talk about, and like, you know, there's so many ways I think that this book could have gone. So like, what made you be like, you know, childhood, high school, that's it?
Yeah, I think I definitely wanted to take on, the coming of age genre, right, or the coming of age story, you know, felt propulsive to me. It felt like it had a natural sort of ending. You know, I think ending it with high school, you know, was my sort of, you know, winky face sort of nod to like John Hughes movies, like all the 80s, like high school movies, you know, like they end at high school, right?
It's also such clearly like the hero's journey.
Yeah,
you know, like
yeah,
it's so like, I mean, you're constantly referencing
For sure.
Western literature, and like
Yeah.
it's such a, you know, I don't want to say trope, but like kind of, it's like it's a way that we tell stories.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, and it's effective, you know, like it felt like it's like a natural end.
Yeah.
And I feel like
Beginning, middle, end.
Yeah, and also like the end of high school is like it's like the first time that for me that I felt like a real dissonance of like this is a huge ending of a thing and a huge beginning of a thing. Like, what do I do with this like super weird feeling of being sad and elated at the same time? Like, I can't even put that into words, you know, like.
Right. I mean, I feel like thinking about that, it's in some ways, graduating from high school is in a lot of ways sort of like the first threshold that you are like sentient about.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And you're getting kicked out of your parents' house, right? So it's
You're
like a lot.
there's physical movement,
Yeah.
you're leaving one place, you're going into another, and you know, while changes happen when you're younger, like, you know, when you're 17, 18, you're just sort of aware of yourself and how that will affect you in just ways that you wouldn't when you were younger.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would do well now as a 48-year-old man with that experience. Like, you're gonna not be in touch with any of your friends anymore, you're switching jobs, you're moving to a new town, and also your family's kicking you out.
Have fun.
Calling my therapist right now, 911. I have a lot to process. You know, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, it's a lot to foist on a 18-year-old. Like, I
It
don't
really
know what to say.
is.
Like, you know, I guess I want to honor how serious I think adolescence is. Like, I think, you know, I mean, this is my rant for just a hot minute. Like, I think we culturally talk about teenagers in a way that's like super shitty. You know, like if you, like, oh, look out, Allison got her driver's license, look out everybody. Or like, you know, the way that a horde of teenagers comes and they sit down next to me at the table, and it's like I kind of roll my eyes because I'm like, oh my God. Like,
I do sometimes.
right. And if you took the word teenagers and you replaced it with basically any other group, women, you know, like the way that we, like if you talked about any other group of people the way that we talk about teenagers, like you would just like get canceled
We talk down to
yesterday.
them so much.
Yeah, sure. And yet
so
we all do
dismissive.
it. No, totally. We do it all the time. It's terrible. And then teenagers are supposed to just take that. And also just like, but when you turn 18, you get all the respect and you get to vote and shoot shit and smoke and all the other, you know, it's just like, that doesn't make any sense. Like people, like all of society's been shitting on kids for like a good 6 years, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay, good luck. We love you. And it's like, no, you don't. You spent 6 years like shitting on me. Don't believe in anything. Also, kick me out of the house and go to college. Bye.
Absolutely. Have you seen Life and Beth yet?
No, I
Has anybody
haven't.
here seen Life and Beth, the Amy Schumer? No? Okay, well, I recommend it because specifically she's telling two different stories. One is like a present time story, but then she's also telling the story of adolescence, of like when she was in high school. And it's one of the most like poignant, not over dramatized, but like sincere in like a really like powerful way. I was sort of shocked at like how articulate and like with just such respect it was. And it's like, you know, friendship dramas and like, you know, she and her best friend break up, but like so often it's seen as like this like soapy thing almost, you know? And I just thought that was so interesting. And I think that was something that I know I was trying to do in my book, you know.
I think you do. Yeah, you definitely do.
I think you do too.
Well, I mean, I think you know, I see it. You know, just thinking of like the visual medium. Like I think like Richard Linklater's Boyhood does a great job of that as
absolutely.
well.
Or Lady. Oh, I love Lady
Lady
Bird.
Bird.
Lady Bird's a great example.
Yeah, for sure. Like just taking that adolescence seriously.
Yeah.
And recognizing that it's absurd and hard and all those.
And
things.
it's funny and it's weird and it's terrifying and.
For sure.
You know, yeah, I mean, adolescence is complicated, and I think it is really hard to see it portrayed in a really sort of, in a good way, for lack of a better word, and I really felt that in this.
Thanks.
So,
and also in Allison's book, I think if you guys haven't, I think our books overlap in such interesting ways.
Yeah, and you wouldn't necessarily expect it. But yeah, I mean, both of our books open in high school, you know, like that. The next chapter in my book, like chapter 1, it's my senior year in high school. It's me walking down the halls of my high school. And that's how your book opens.
Yeah.
You know, very much, I was like, we are having a similar experience, which was great, you know. And I think that's such a power of memoir is, you know, as a reader, there's just this opportunity to not feel alone. Like, you know, to feel seen, to feel like you're in this like shared experience. You know, I mean, something that I really felt in your book was, you know, the loneliness of being a teenager and how hard it can be, and also coupled with trauma. You know, something that I think you write so exquisitely are these moments of sort of darkness and, you know, getting through that. And, you know, something that, okay, so I'm curious about how you feel about this. A question that I used to get a lot was, you know, people would talk about, so my book is basically about being abused by a teacher in my high school. You know, sexual abuse, how that affected my life, not well. But it turned out okay. I wrote a book about it, so it's fine. But I would get a lot like, oh, well, wasn't this cathartic? Wasn't it therapeutic to write this? Isn't this all better now? And I would be like, you know, I mean, it's strange. It's this interesting tension because writing is an incredibly powerful therapeutic tool, but like, writing a book about this was absolutely not therapeutic for me. It was very difficult and hard. And so I'm wondering what it was like for you, and like what was your process in trying to like get it on the page, and you know, and also to be fair to the people involved in that, which I think you did so well.
Thanks.
And so that's a big question.
For sure, yeah. And I think, you know what's therapeutic? Therapy.
Therapy. Shout out to my therapist. I don't know. Did you thank yours in the acknowledgments?
Yes. Like not.
I
Yes.
think I did. I hope so if Melissa, if you're watching this, thank you.
Don't kill her. Yeah, I did. So I mean, therapy is therapeutic. I think the writing of it actually, you know, I describe it and sometimes as like sort of trying to pick a scab a little bit. Like I wanted to, like I didn't want the language or the experience, the writing about the experience to feel so therapetized that it didn't have, like sort of like blood in its veins. So like for the hard parts, like I really had to sort of like go back in and like untherapeutize some of it, just to chum the waters a little bit.
Yeah.
And there were definitely days when like I would come home from my writing and I would just kind of be glassy-eyed and have to kind of, you know, recover a little bit, you know, because like I have like little kids at home and I'm just like, oh, hi, you know, like now I have to be like a normal person again. So it wasn't cathartic for me.
Not cathartic.
Yeah, the most interesting thing for me in writing was, you know, I would sort of get notes about like fleshing out my parents, and in the process of making,
I have the same notes.
yeah, in the process of making my parents like real characters, like I really sort of developed really deep. I mean, not that I didn't have empathy for them before, but like I think writing about it was really powerful. So yeah, so did that answer? I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, no, absolutely. I feel like, so there was one like little thing that I was rereading your book again this weekend, and like there was one moment at the end of chapter 2, after this like really tough experience with your grandmother when she hits you with the scissors, and it's a tough scene, and it was, I'm certain, a tough moment. But then the ending of it, you know, my grandmother, gentle one moment, violent in the next. Violence was sometimes kindness, sometimes it was love, sometimes it was rage, but it was everywhere, always. I mean, I was just like, oof, like, I felt that, and it's so hard to do that, you know, it's so hard, I think, as a memoirist. I mean, I've struggled with that, like, how to be fair, how to make people real, you know. I feel like you really crafted that well. I felt like your parents were your father especially, I felt like was a very full, complicated character.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and it's, you know, and I think like an unintended side effect of growing up in Carlisle as like the only Vietnamese family is, like, I didn't have anyone to compare notes with, you know, like I'd be like, hey, do your parents do this fucked up shit? Because it was super, you know, like, it was just like you know, everybody who was affected was in my family. So I, you know, like I never knew if this was like just like a Tran family like thing, or if this was like a Vietnamese thing, or it would have been helpful, I think, you know, like super helpful to compare notes. Yeah.
Again, like how when you feel very sort of alone in adolescence, it can just feel so overwhelming, and you know, and you can really feel trapped.
Yeah.
I mean, I got that very much at moments in the book, and that was something, and like as someone who wrote about something very similar, it felt like, oof, I get that, I connect, and that's like, I think that's the power of memoir. You know, it's like anybody can tell a story, anyone can write a story, like, but that's a novel. Like, what we try to do is, you know, be able to delve in and be like, well, this is how this story affected me, this is how this happened, and these are the consequences, which I think is so sort of interesting. And your book very much ends at the end of high school, right?
Yeah, that night, graduation night.
Yeah.
Can I ask you your question, like, to just boomerang it back to you, like, about the idea of, like, characterizing people or turning them into characters, and you said that you got the same note about, and I noticed, like, I mean, there was definitely, I remember reading your book, you know, that there were, sometimes it felt a little bit like I would be like, where's her dad? Like, I mean, is he left out, and is that, like, purposefully left out because he's not around?
Yeah. Yes. That's the short answer.
Spoiler alert.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just
Spoiler alert. My father is not very present in the book because he wasn't present in my life at the time.
Yeah.
And that was very much like a conscious decision. That was something that I was really sort of like trying to like work out in the editorial process. Like after like writing the first draft, and I was like, okay, this is going to be a real book now. Let's let's think about things. It was very much about sort of trying to like make my parents and my sister sort of come out a bit more. But it was also a choice because, you know, I really felt strongly this is a book about my experience with my teacher and, you know, the violence and the manipulation and like the isolation, and so it also felt very true to the book to have it be super focused because that was my experience of it. But it was complicated, and you know, I feel like while I was writing the book, I really felt like I was trying so hard to be beyond fair, like to be super kind to not just my parents and the other teachers in my high school, but even him. You know, I really sort of felt like I actively was like, I want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. You know, I don't want to, you know, the blame is on me. This is a book about me and my experience, and I cannot assume anyone else's thought process or what they knew or what they didn't or blah, blah, blah. But then when the book came out, I actually really regretted that.
Oh, really?
And I kind of wish that I'd been harder on the teacher. I wish I'd been harder on my abuser. I felt like...
You mean in the writing?
In the writing.
Yeah.
Yes. In the writing, I was like, ooh, yeah, you know, I was maybe a little too nice, I think. I almost wrote an essay about that, and then I was like, that's petty. But I still...
It's never too late.
It's never too late. It is never, ever too late. Yeah. I'm being featured in a documentary that's coming out later this year that's about abusive relationships. It was just announced. It's called Dear Pony. It's going to be on Hulu and Freeform. And that was actually something that I talked about in the documentary. Like, that was something that I brought up of like, well, you know, what do you wish that you'd written the book that you didn't? I was like, well, I wish I'd said all these other things about the teacher that I didn't. And then, so this is actually sort of getting into another question. So like after the book came out for me, I learned all this stuff that I hadn't known when I was writing the book. I heard from a lot of other students in my high school, which was wild. I heard from other teachers, like I just got a lot more information, including that teachers had known. It was not as much of a secret as I thought it was. Other students were aware, other teachers were aware, the administration was probably aware, and that made me very, very, very angry.
Yeah.
In like a whole new way than I ever had been before, because I was like, well, fuck this shit. You know, I really thought I was like 17-year-old Allison, like no one knows.
Yeah.
But of course I wasn't, because I was 17-year-old Allison. But you know, that was a new sort of like processing thing that I did not expect to have happen. So I'm wondering if after this got published, because this is the paperback, so it's been out for a year, right? Almost?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Oh, you got a delayed paperback. Smart. Smart. Well,
Thanks, Bryn.
Bryn, I'm jealous. I'm jealous because that's what you get to do in-person events. So like that's cool.
Yeah.
But so I'm wondering if once the book came out, how have you, you know, engaged with this story of your life, with the people, with, you know, has anything shifted since the book came out?
That's so interesting. I don't think so. I think like I haven't read anything or having reread it, you know, like I thought like, ugh, that feels like tinny or, you know, tone deaf or just wrong. You know, I think, you know, obviously I could have written a book twice as long and fleshed out lots of other people or included other stories, you know, I think in the interest of wanting everyone to feel like a real person because they're all real people.
They are. That's the secret in memoir.
Yeah.
They're all real people.
Yeah, and what's hilarious is, you know, I have like my high school friends had a book group and they all got together and read it. You weren't involved in that, John, I'm sorry. But then, and then they zoomed me, my friend John from high school is here, and they zoomed me and then they were like, literally, they're like, who's this person? Who's this? Am I this person? Am I you?
Oh, wow.
No, I never did that. I was like, come on.
Don't they understand composite characters?
Yeah, no, I think I have very few composite characters, I would say.
I didn't have many either, but I'm just saying,
for sure.
whenever someone's like, I didn't do, like, whatever, I'm like, well, it was a composite character.
Yeah, so that was good.
It's a nice out, I think.
Yeah. I appreciate that you didn't, that your teacher is slippery as a character, that like he's not sort of like a mustache twirling, like it doesn't feel that way. Like I think it.
No, he was a John Mayer loving, Abercrombie and Fitch wearing, sketchy guy.
Yeah.
Looking back very clearly, like, whoa, you know.
Yeah. But I appreciate that, like there's a seduction in the way that you write his character that I think is very true to you as a 17-year-old.
Absolutely, and that was like a very conscious choice.
Yeah.
I really wanted to write a book that was honest to my experience. Because I felt like writing a book about, you know, a student-teacher relationship and how awful it is, from my point of view now, would be like so boring. It's like, well, he was a monster and it really sucked for me and I don't know what I was thinking, the end. It's not a very interesting book. So I really decided to be like, okay, like I'm gonna be as true as possible to 17-year-old Allison, even when it's ugly and even when it's hard to read and like, ugh, you know. And I felt like you did the same thing here. You know, I really felt like you were very true to like, you know, young you.
Thanks, yeah. And also like navigating a very complicated family and
Absolutely.
a complicated town. You know, I think I didn't want to just be like, my town's racist, fuck this place. You know, it's like
Right.
there were good people who lived there and not great people, and my family was the same.
Right, and it's also that's such a flatter, less interesting, less real dynamic
For
story.
Sure, for sure. I mean, that's
You
not
know?
anybody's story. Like,
No.
like all of our stories are complicated.
Yeah. Yes.
So
Absolutely.
I think we got the hand wave from Jean.
Yep. If you guys want to move to Q&A.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, okay. So Anyone have any questions about Saigon? About, do you want to get a tattoo? I hear there's a very long wait list and you gotta go far away.
Very long.
But, so any questions? Oh, in the back. Or not back, middle.
I have so many questions.
Oh gosh.
First, I wonder how
Just
you're.
one.
Okay.
Kidding.
We can come back to you.
Totally
Okay, cool. The child's voice is so strong and so funny. Like Lou, I just love Lou and how you portray Lou.
Oh,
How
thanks.
do you do
Lou is
that?
great.
Oh gosh.
Okay, so to repeat the question so the question is, the child voice is great, especially Lou, who is like so fully figured and fully realized on the page. How did you do that?
I mean, thankfully, I had two very young children at home who were almost the exact same age.
Oh, you're cheating.
So yeah.
That's not fair.
I listened to how they were talking and how everything was very matter of fact, and there's like zero nuance with my kids. They're just developing it now, which I appreciate. But I think so I just thought like about how you navigate like sort of trauma and like weirdness and things that don't make sense. Like you just accept it, and I know that that's how my brother and I did it. So I think I felt fortunate. I felt like Jane Goodall. Toddlers. What did you say? That was amazing.
Just making notes the entire time. Yeah, were there any like editorial choices that you made when doing that at all? Or was there like,
I don't know.
No?
Tell me what you mean by editorial.
I mean, sometimes, I know that sometimes when I write dialogue, occasionally it's not very good first time around. So I'm wondering if, maybe was that something that like you had to work on or,
Yeah, I'm sure. I think, I always sort of describe writing as, the writing is sort of like getting up to the top of Mount Everest. And then you have to climb down, and climbing down is editing. Unless you want to die at the top of the mountain, which is all, fine.
That's
a story too.
That's Twitter.
But yeah.
That's Twitter.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. What was your favorite chapter in the book to write and why?
Ooh, that's a great question. What is your favorite chapter in the book to write and why?
Yeah, I think the Metamorphosis.
I loved that chapter.
I think like the high school chapters felt fresher to me. Like the earlier, like the really young chapters, like the chapters with all the kids and all my family, was just like so much farther back and like less emotionally charged. For better or worse, like it's really easy for me to like tap into teen angst. It's an app.
Right there.
It's an app. It's running all the time. I have to sleep it a lot. But like to go back into like my early childhood was harder, right? But like the high school stuff was really fun, and like I just had like a great group of friends in high school. So like I really wanted to like honor them and like tell all kinds of like ridiculous stories, right?
Yeah.
And so my friend John from high school. Actually, I've known John since kindergarten. He's
Aww.
here, so you can, Really, he should.
Still
Yes, feel free to Q or A him. All the tea, all the hot goss.
I mean, we didn't really get to talk about this, but I think this brings up like the amazing intertextuality you were doing, and like, was that fun? Like doing that sort of like, because that's all sort of like I feel like a different brain or almost brain space than like writing about the emotional stuff and like trying to like make a picture on the page, but like talking about the Metamorphosis and the Scarlet Letter and Crime and Punishment. So like, what was that like? Did you enjoy that, or was that like,
it's really hard for me not to do that. Like, I think that came from, it's just like licensing and lawsuits aside, like I can't not reference like movies or music or books or things that I've read. It's just like the way my brain is broken. That like I have to triangulate all these things all the time. And the whole idea of like framing the book through great books like just came out of like the very first thing I ever wrote for my agent. Like I wrote the intro, the prologue, pretty much like it as it is. And
my prologue is almost exactly the same as it was in the beginning.
You're just like you have this fever dream. You're just like, I'm getting it out of my body. You write it, and
then there's the rest of the book to write.
Yeah, totally. But it's like a good blueprint, right? If you can kind of capture like that fire in the first thing that you write, I think it puts a lot of gas in your tank.
It sets the tone.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
I'm kind of asking a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So that was your favorite chapter, right? What was the most difficult part to write for you?
What was the most difficult chapter to write?
Yeah, I think the early, Crime and Punishment, maybe, like one of the, like any of the first three, they're all hard. They're hard because, like, you know, they're painful memories, and they're painful in a way that, like, I'm not a full realized human being, so, like, I'm writing about, like, my own child abuse, you know, and, like, that just doesn't feel good, but then, like, I have to, like, sit there with it, but, like, not, but write it in a way for the readers to sort of, like, make sense of it, and not traumatize my readers, you know, like, I didn't want it to be, like, you know, torture porn or whatever, you know,
Absolutely.
like, you know, or, like, misery porn, like, it, you know, like, because I'm not, like, I'm naturally not that way, so, so I think, like, writing about that, like the super heavy stuff, like, the single hardest thing that I had to write, honestly, was, and it's the only scene, so, like, everything that I write in the book, like, I made a rule for myself that I wouldn't write about it unless I was a witness to the thing. Like, it didn't feel fair for me to, like, tell somebody else's story when I wasn't even around it. So, like, the one exception is the story about my dad getting bullied at the factory, which I obviously was not there on third shift with my father at the tire factory.
You weren't?
Yeah, childcare was real tough. So I was just in the back. But you know, my dad, you know, for all of his faults, was really helpful in the writing process, and he, you know, he knew that I was working on a memoir, and, you know, sort of unprompted, he went to community college and got an associate's, but he took this, like, English 101 class at community college, and he had to write all these, like, 1-page, 2-page essays, and he sent them all to me, and one of the essays was that story. And I was like, this is too good to not include. So I, you know, retold it in my way, but that was the only one, and it was really hard to write, just because it was, like, the first time that, like, I sort of read about my dad's vulnerability in his own voice, which he would have never shared with me, ever, in a million years. But he shared it with, you know, Professor Houghton at, you know, Harrisburg Area Community College, you know, like, so thanks for that, yeah. So, I mean, I think there's, like, this, like, really amazing thing that can happen, you know, for people who are trying to connect through writing and reading each other's stories. I guess that's the takeaway.
Absolutely. So this is a hot take question. Is your dad a good writer?
Yeah, he's not bad. He's very factual, which I love. Like, he's so, like, my dad is the kind of guy who, like, complained about how much fiction I read. You know, like, literally, my dad was like, why do you want to read stories about people who never existed, doing things that never happened? Literally, and I'd be like, oh, it's pleasurable. You know, like, my dad was, like, Mr. Nonfiction all the time. So I think, like, even when he writes about really difficult things, like, his writing is, like, very sparse. Like, he doesn't elaborate. So I really appreciate how he's got a very Spartan style.
Very Hemingway?
Yeah. Like a little autistic maybe, but yeah, autistic Hemingway. Yeah.
All right.
Is that a name of a band? Should be.
Absolutely. That is absolutely the name of a band.
Appreciate it.
Other questions? One more question.
You spoke earlier with such empathy for teenagers, and I went to the high school where you work, and the dynamics are you develop a lot of close relationships with the students. I'm wondering how your work as a teacher has influenced the way that you wrote and maybe the way you were able to reflect on yourself.
Oh, that's, yeah, I think.
Okay, so that, repeating it for those not here, she goes to your high school.
Went, yeah.
And you developed and you developed a lovely connection with your students.
I would hope so, yeah.
And she's wondering how you did that?
I'm wondering how Phuc's work as a teacher influenced his writing.
How your work as a teacher has influenced your writing this, which is very much about you as a student.
Yeah, for sure. And I think taking myself really seriously, you know, as a character and as like a teenager, and not, you know, it's like if I'm upset, you know, like I think when like a teenager comes into your homeroom and they're complaining about how they didn't get the new iPhone, it's like you just have to meet them where they're at. You're like, wow, that's really terrible.
It's so sad. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Yeah, tell me more about that. Like, you're not just gonna be like, get the fuck out of here. Like, you know, like, their children's starving. I mean, that's just where they're at. So I think, you know, obviously, like, I'm not perfect, and I'm sure I have, you know, dismissed them. I try not to, you know, and I try to meet them where they're at. And I think, you know, when I'm my best self, like, I think I'm trying to, you know, meet them and help them be their best selves. I don't know. Some of my former students are here, so maybe they can call bullshit on that or validate that.
Great advisor, can attest.
5 for 5, would recommend.
Two thumbs up, fine family fun.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and I think actually meeting your students where they are, you know, respecting, being true to them, like that is so much in this amazing book. And I think that's part of why this is, Saigon is just so powerful. So, yeah. So that's all that we have time for.
Wrap it up.
Okay. So, well, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Allison.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to? Thank you all for coming. Books are for sale at the front of the room and all around you. Check our website for our upcoming events. We have a few exciting ones. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Jean.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Were you watching How could I not?
That's awesome.
Now the time to tell us more about that.
Oh, nice. Oh, yeah.
We had a strong, usually, I wanted to I got an email about it. But your book is so good. How are you? Hi! How are you? Good. How are you? I'm about to move here. Yeah. That's moving it. That's so funny. So and my friend Ella. Hi. It's really nice to see all of you. Oh my goodness.